Look, the whole gauntlet of being a teenager is, can you survive being slashed to death by a dude who got murdered in a lake 20 years ago by some negligent counselors? And if you can survive that, then hey, good, you get to go to college.
Hello and welcome to a special Halloween edition of The Last Picture House, the podcast where we discuss films that have finally stumbled into Japanese cinemas. My name's Marcus Lovett, and here to discuss all things macabre, I'm joined by David Red Room Lynch, Chris the Undead Gibbs, and Maria, I'm your number one fan, Suzuki. This week we're talking about John Krasinski's A Quiet Place, currently playing in Japanese cinemas. But first, what makes horror such a compelling genre? Perhaps only sci-fi and the romantic comedy have the same staying power. Dai, why do you think that is?
That's an interesting question. Cinema in its purest form is about eliciting emotion, and I think maybe the easiest emotion to go for in the cinema is probably going to be something like horror or fear. They're like primal urges, and I feel like in a darkened space like the cinema, that is a very, very easy thing to elicit.
The thing that always fascinates me is people want to be scared in the cinema. When I think of going to the cinema and what's on, I'm looking at comedies. There's always something that's there that I think, well, I've got to be in the right mood for this. I mean, do you usually go straight for the horror? I know you're a big horror fan.
I am a big horror fan, and it is sort of like, it's Halloween. It's that time of year where the nights start creeping in, it's getting a little colder. I automatically start thinking like, okay, I need to watch The Exorcist. I'm probably going to have to watch something else. And the list will grow and grow and grow. I know others feel the same.
I just wanted to build on what Dai said about being in a darkened space and something being inherently creepy about the cinema, right? Like in a movie theater, it's dark, it's eliciting something that most people are already afraid of. And horror is so universal that it's easy to say, okay, well, let's just take what they're scared of and make that into something. And I think that for a lot of people, that's entertaining. It's not just entertaining, rather. It's comforting, Yeah. You kind of feel better when you know that you're in a controlled space where, okay, yeah, I'm scared, but I can walk out of here and I won't be stabbed to death by a dude with a mask or something like that.
And you've also touched on another reason why I think horror has a lasting appeal. Every sort of generation has a different sort of thing that they fear. And going back through the decades of and actually looking at history of horror, it almost sort of encapsulates like a little sort of like history box of like what people were frightened of right at the time. Yeah. Which is why like analysing horror now is so fascinating, because like, what are we really afraid of? And I don't think anyone can properly answer that. We need hindsight, we need a bit of distance. But I think looking at the 2000s horror films, like the Saws and whatnot, that's when it starts getting quite interesting.
Yeah, can you elaborate a bit on that? Like for me, when I think of the films I watched growing up, the scary ones were always the big films from the 70s, of course, and then in the 80s it was more kind of schlock. Can you think of an example of like a particular period and something that was maybe really important to that era that may have changed now? Okay,
well let's stick with the 2000s, because I think for us, I talk about us as in the people in the room of a certain age and a certain generation. Like for me, in the early 2000s, I was just about 17, 18 years old. And so a lot of the films were hitting me at a certain age when these were sort of like a formative age for me. And you can't talk about the 2000s without mentioning 9/11. And I think the importance of 9/11 is the fact that it was an event that we all witnessed through film, or through at least TV, a screen. Yeah. For us, and not being Americans, we experienced that through the TV screen, and that influence has been pervasive throughout cinema, throughout the whole 2000s. But also the fact that it brought with it this sort of reality. And so when I talk about things like films like Saw, there is a sort of a dirtiness and a sort of groundedness to the film. It's sort of indicative of the media we're consuming as an entire culture. And horror is sort of like at the tippy top of that. And I think it has to play on these fears for it to have any effect. Because Boris Karloff isn't going to do it anymore because we've seen things in real life.
Still pretty scary.
I agree.
Still
Don't
pretty
get me
scary.
wrong, he is still pretty scary, but like, you know, to a bunch of teenagers in the 2000s, like, he's not. And a bunch of teenagers in the early, the 2018s, he's also not.
Well, you know, I think I'm a little bit more vintage because I'm kind of a non-practicing horror fan because I grew up with a lot of horrors. My mom loves horror, so I grew up. The Exorcist, I think I had to watch it like 10 times. And of course, I'm Italian, so I watched all of Dario Argento. And after that, I was traumatized.
Okay, I have a general question for everybody. The film that you spent the most time looking through your fingers, the thing that you remember, almost an embarrassing memory of you in the cinema curling up under the seat.
I would say definitely Suspiria. Suspiria. I didn't watch it in the cinema. I watched it at home, but I was really like I watch it through my fingers, and I still do. I still do.
I think this might say more about me as a person, but Blair Witch Project and actually the other one, the demon one, what's it called?
Oh, Paranormal Activity.
Paranormal Activity.
Yeah.
Schlocky as that film is, and it still got me, and it got me really good.
That last part in at least the theatrical version where
they changed it a bit, didn't they?
Yeah, they changed the ending a few times. So there were multiple endings, and they had them all on the DVD. But the one that went to theaters was the one, the demon face thing. I mean,
Yeah.
Spoiler alert from 10 years ago, guys.
It really wasn't. Don't make me feel any older than I am.
No, I did the same thing when I saw it the first time. I was like, "Whoa, hold up! No! I don't like that." Yeah, for me, it's Paranormal Activity and Nightmare on Elm Street. The very first one, I was like 6 or 7 or something. And I was so scared of that movie that I had to go to the bathroom, and I didn't go because I was scared that Freddy Krueger was going to get me like through the toilet. And I was like legitimately terrified. And then I peed on myself.
I mean, there is something brilliant about. I mean, that shows a particular vulnerability of like being in your home, in your bed, in your own mind,
right?
And yet he can still get you.
Oh yeah,
that's fantastic.
I'm still afraid, even though I live in a very small apartment, that he's gonna be hiding somewhere. I still do.
He's around the one corner that I have here.
How about you, Di?
Yeah, no, Nightmare on Elm Street, definitely. I had recurring images in my early years of seeing that and seeing him running down the street with those elongated arms. And being like, even the laws of physics is like, it's dream logic. And that, in a very key way, sort of keys in that Freudian sort of, that interesting, like, you can't control it, but then it's kind of interesting because in the later films, they do end up controlling it, becoming dream warriors and all the rest of it. It's really fascinating.
Well, R.I.P. Johnny Depp's character.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, for my part, it was always Aliens. So I just remember a particular day where I went to the cinema. I went with my dad. He said, yes, there's this action film. I didn't really get that it was a horror. I don't even know if I'd seen Alien at that point. And I spent the entire film, after the first 5 minutes, I was under the seat, looking through my fingers. And I remember coming out of the cinema and everybody looking at me and feeling very, very stupid. But it was a truly scary movie in 1986.
Yeah, and it's interesting that a lot of people's first experience with that franchise will probably more than likely be Aliens.
Yeah.
And it doesn't shy away from being, it's tense. From like the moment it started, the moment she agrees to going back, the whole, I think the editing changes slightly and the cutting changes, it becomes so much more, the momentum starts building, and it doesn't stop until the very end.
Yeah, the thing with Aliens is that it builds on the first one. So where the first one was a horror, it was a creature.
Horror.
Yeah, it was a creature in an enclosed space coming to get you, hunting everybody one by one, kind of like Jaws or any other kind of monster movie. This film takes it turns it into a military fantasy, and it has a lot of other things going on. It has the company plays a bigger role. I remember the company being a big part of the first one, but
it was when they finally
in the
revealed
second
Ash.
one, Ash. But it always seems secondary to the main story of the creature.
Yeah.
Whereas in the second one, the company is now actually going out of its way to bring these things back to Earth.
It's the sort of also scary nature of the impotence of certain military interventions, and like because they're drawing heavily on like Vietnam, and that's very obvious.
Absolutely, and I was going to bring up Vietnam because I have to talk a little bit about Predator at some stage.
I was going to say that was right. That's point
for me, and Predator also is something that's relevant to the film that we're going to talk a bit about later on. But Predator is very much about, in my view, it's a response to the Vietnam, almost the taboo about not talking about Vietnam. And so in the 80s, you start to get these films. And I think very early on, it was Platoon, there was, what was it, Hamburger Hill?
Hamburger Hill, was it First Blood, and then...
First Blood was
First
the
Blood,
earliest.
of
I think that
course,
was
yeah.
like 84 or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is where IMDb is going to really
Full
help us.
Metal Jacket was that?
Full Metal Jacket was 87.
87. Okay.
I think Platoon and Predator are all about 87, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all of these films are addressing the fact that we haven't really addressed the Vietnam thing.
Yeah.
And, Predator's playing with that. You know, they came out of the jungle and then it slips back into the jungle unseen. You know, I find that's something that speaks to what you were talking about earlier, a time capsule.
Yeah, I was actually, precisely. And it's definitely playing on all those fears. Interestingly, a lot of because we're talking about Hollywood directly and American films, that we're talking about predominantly American fears, which isn't, we're taking quite a broad view of horror in general, but there is a case to be made for sort of the British horror, coming from Britain myself, and also the Japanese horror. And that's, again, going back into white and Spanish, and obviously also Italian, and all the rest of it. Like, horror is so fascinating because it encapsulates everything from these cultures. It's really interesting.
I actually really wanted to touch on that point for one major thing. I am a humongous Japanese horror buff. Literally my favorite horror movie, and by favorite, I mean scariest thing in the world to me, is Chakushinari, the One Missed Call. There's so much cleverness in that movie that it scared me because it showed me that no matter what I did, that ghost was going to beat me. Like, no matter what. Like, if I got haunted by this ghost, I was going to lose. And there's something very pervasive about the Japanese style of horror where there's this idea that, in Tokyo, for example, you're never more than 10 meters away from a person, but you are separated by a galaxy worth of space, personally, internally. Yeah. If a ghost is haunting you, the person next to you doesn't give a crap. They're not going to care, right? And that's the scariest part. You can live in a house, you can live in an apartment, you can live here where we're recording, and there's a ghost here, and next door they're having a party. America is kind of the opposite of that. It's always the isolation is the key factor. This idea that you're in the middle of nowhere, you don't have anyone to run to, you have no one to communicate with, and therefore this horror will affect you and only you, and no one will be left to tell your story.
It's great when you bring up a point like that. All I think of in my head is like a list of films I think you're talking about, and it's going to be Texas Chainsaw Massacre,
Yep.
Deliverance,
Yes.
and it's like The Hills of Eyes. I'm like, oh my god, yes, this, and this.
Yeah.
Yes, and especially the Japanese ones. It's technology and, like, for example, the first 15 minutes of Ring. Mm-hmm. They are the scariest thing for me. I think the Japanese horror really lingers.
Yes.
It doesn't
Yes.
leave you after you see the movie.
That's why I don't watch it anymore. Now that I live in Japan, I'm like, no, thank you. I can't watch this movie.
I feel like there's like quite a strong connection between British, sort of traditional Victorian British horror and Japanese horror. And this is like, I'm thinking of things like the Woman in Black. And it's these sort of haunting tales, because you're right. And it comes from culture. And I'm feeling like a lot of Japanese culture is kind of linked to Victorian culture in a sort of the repressed nature, the unspoken things. And these are, I feel like, and everyone talks about Japan being like an island nation. It's like, you forget the UK is an island nation. Yeah, we're connected to Europe, but we have our isolation issues as well. And I think that keys into that.
And family secrets.
Yeah,
Yes.
family secrets.
Now, on that note, you guys, have you seen The Babadook?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's Australian.
Yeah.
Yes.
Australian. I'm sorry.
Great
Cut
accent.
that out, please.
Don't
But
cut that out.
but
I'm too scared. I'm too scared to watch it.
All right, I'm not going to give any spoilers away, but I just watched it a couple of days ago.
Oh.
And speaking of that idea of repression and keeping things and family secrets even, there's something very, very special about the Babadook, the way that they handle those kind of things. And again, Australia is technically a continent, so also a nation.
This is true. You certainly studied geography.
I know
Jesus.
four things about Australia.
One.
Marcus. That's
Okay.
number one.
thing. Got ya.
2, terrifying spiders. 3, box jellyfish. And 4, terrifying spiders again because they're terrifying.
All right, I love lists, but I'm no fan of like a top 3 or a top 5. Let's just talk a little bit about some of our favorite horror films, things that mean something to you. Chris, you were clapping your hands. Do you want to go first?
I think that my favorite horror films, or the ones that have impacted me the most, were, of course, Chakshin Ari, of the first one Missed Call. It just really showed me how clever horror movies can be. It was one of the first Japanese horror movies that I ever seen, and before then I was into slasher flicks and zombie movies and stuff. The second one is, ironically, Dawn of the Dead, but not just the first one. The remake in 2004, I believe.
That's pretty good.
It's a good one.
Interesting, Zack Snyder's sort of major breakout hit.
Yeah.
That was Zack Snyder?
Yeah.
Now I kind of respect him a little bit.
No, he ruined it with Batman v Superman.
Yeah.
It's okay.
No, I mean, honestly, I mean, I know I cheated a little bit because I named 3 movies already, but
You can have a full.
the most impactful, I'd say, the horror movie that I would watch and recommend to everybody, of course, gotta say, Evil Dead.
Wait. Which one? Evil Dead 1, 2?
Okay,
Because 2 is a remake.
Okay, as a child, I would say 1, simply because it was terrifying, like, as a kid. But 2, as an adult, because it was a little bit more on the nose, like it knew what it was doing.
Yeah, the sort of the funny tone mixed with the horror.
Yeah,
is
exactly.
much more knowing in the second one than it is in the first.
Exactly,
Which is
exactly.
fair enough, yeah.
So I'd say if you're going to show a terrifying, like, pea fuel thing to your kids, the first Evil Dead. But if you want to watch something that's entertaining, the second one is probably better.
Okay, for me, I agree. I don't like making lists because I know I'll leave off a film and I'll kick myself later. But I have to put Exorcist at number 1 because I think it's not only just a great horror film, it's an incredibly intelligently directed, written, produced. It's like
it's canon, but it's canon for a reason.
yeah. I kind of have to say it. I like to go for body horror as well, so I'm a big David Cronenberg fan.
Cronenberg, yes.
So I'm going with The Fly for number
Thank you
2.
for bringing up Cronenberg.
Yeah, big fan of Cronenberg.
All of his films.
All of them.
Existence.
Existence is fantastic, and I even go as far to say
so
like his
gross.
later work with The Eastern Promise and
It's-
History of Violence. The horror roots in those films
Yeah,
are
they're
fantastic.
not obviously horror films,
No.
but it's there. I mean, it's certainly there in History of Violence.
Yeah, I
You
don't
know
know.
that-
I'd recommend people reading that graphic novel if you've not ever read it. It's
No, I haven't read that. I've
fantastic.
heard it's good.
Yeah, it's very, very good. And number 3, I'm going to have to go with a found footage film. I do like them. I'll go with Blair Witch, but I'm sort of like having that, because people say that's the first one. I guess it was the first breakout one. And with that, I'm kind of including its media and marketing in the same time, because that did a lot of the legwork to making that a great, great film.
Maria, how about you?
Well, I would say Exorcist for me too, because I grew up in Catholic Italy, so it was a reality that was quite close. I remember there was one teacher, he was a priest, and he was like, I would be so perfect to do an exorcism. And he was, yes. And he
Holy
was, yeah,
shit!
yeah. And he-
I had an exorcist in my school. One
No.
of the teachers had
well, that's the
performed
sign of being a
exorcisms.
good school,
He had
What?
performed an exorcism, and he was very happy to tell the students about it.
No, in that case, our teacher was from the Order of St. Francis, and he was blaming the system for allowing only Jesuits to do it. So he was like, this is not fair. He would go on and on. So that was pretty scary because that was a reality that I could in some way see. And I would say Carrie. Carrie.
Yes! That's a
Brian De
good one.
Palma.
Really good one.
Once again, it goes into all the, the school, the bullying. It's so close in a way, so many themes, and the ending. As much as I know it, if I watch it again, I just jump like I watched it the first time.
Yeah,
yes. And a third one, I would say definitely Dario Argento. Dario Argento, I don't know what's the title in English. In Italian, it's Profondo Rosso, so it's deep red or something.
It is deep red in
Deep
English,
Red.
I think.
That is one of the. It's the beginning of Dario Argento were not that horror-ish. They were more psychothrillers. That is his bridge to go into the horror world because we see more blood, you see more violence, and that one is once again, I don't want to spoil it for people who are going to watch it, but it has an ending that involves an elevator and a chain.
Oh,
like
boy.
yes. What about you, Marcus?
Well, for me, we've already mentioned a couple of things, but one that we haven't talked about, Jaws. I do like the monster hunting people down kind of genre. I do like, everybody is ignoring the horror, the threat. They're going about their daily business like there's nothing going on. The mayor of Amity Island in Jaws, just like, it's tourist season. We can't close the beach. I love that stuff. I love the fact that everyone's just ignoring the thing that's blatantly obvious to the protagonist.
Yeah, I know, I agree with that. And I have to say, because I'll burst, but if anyone asks, I do say Jaws is my favourite film. I don't know if I count it as a strictly horror.
I would agree with
Me
that.
too.
I would agree. Yeah,
Me too. I always thought it was like a thriller or not a horror. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think you could class it as suspense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But, the lack of blood doesn't make it less horrible. I mean, if you think about
it's
it,
pretty
like,
bloody when Quentin
I mean,
gets
would you?
eaten.
I mean, you would class Psycho as a horror, right?
Yes, I would.
But if you think about it, a lot of it is suspense. It's not. You don't see a hell of a lot. You see a skeleton spin around. You see some chocolate syrup going down the plug hole.
However, the detective gets slashed across the face and falls down the stairs.
It's a bendy knife.
It does bend.
Well, honestly, I think it's the least you see, the more scared
it's
you
got
are.
to be in your head. I mean,
Yes.
This is classic horror tropes as well. That the less you see, the more impact it has. And I have that comment to make about The Quiet Place as well.
one more, The Shining. We have to talk
yeah.
about The Shining a little
Yeah.
bit. So what I love about The Shining is just the technical brilliance of that film. I mean, like a lot of the other Kubrick films, of course, it has that standout technical moment. Barry Lyndon has the lenses. This film, it has the Steadicam. And the way that the camera moves around that building, the building feels alive. That's one of the things I love about the Overlook Hotel, is it seems... It has a soul.
There's been so much talked about The Shining. There's that fantastic documentary. Well, I say fantastic. It's an interesting documentary, and it's what was one of the things it pulls out for me when you talk about the Steadicam, and that's the sort of the sense of place you get from moving about the Overlook Hotel, but also then the impossible geometry you get from it being places shouldn't be where they are, and it tricks you into thinking that they are where they are. And it's really unsettling.
That aspect, the living, changing, and completely incomprehensible hotel is my favorite thing about that entire movie. And I didn't even know it. I saw it when I was, I think the first time I saw it, I was 20 years old. So I was old enough to understand spatial like dynamics and stuff. The way that the camera worked, the way that the space was used, and I might say abused, it was absolutely perfect. Because you never knew where the hell you were as the viewer, which means that you didn't know where the characters were, which means that anytime a character came out of quote unquote nowhere, they could have been right around the hall, or right around the corner rather. They could have been next to the person the whole time. And that spatial confusion is one of my favorite things about horror.
What's remarkable, of course, about The Exorcist is it doesn't seem to date. I mean, it's of the 70s, but it doesn't seem to ever really date.
And you'd think the costumes and everything else would place it in the 70s, but it doesn't really have any actual impact in it.
Yeah, the effects, it just seems weirdly relatable.
Yeah. I mean, I tie that back to the sort of the cinematography and how deep every frame is, and how sort of like the detail that's in the shots. One of my favourite scenes in that is when I can't remember the name of the character, the mother, and she starts hearing the scratching in the ceiling. It's very, very early on. It's sort of one of the earlier scares in the film, and it's the way this sort of scene builds. And she sort of hears this scratching. She goes to investigate. She opens the attic door. She grabs herself a candle. She lights the candle, and she's exploring up in the attic. And this is proper classic horror territory, where you are exploring somewhere where you don't normally explore. It's where all the family memories are. Obviously, she's alone. Reagan doesn't have a father. We don't really know what happens to the father. No one's ever really talked about it in the film, and yet
that's another thing that's great about it. It makes it kind of it's
exactly.
a trope. It's
Yeah,
a trope.
it is a trope.
The missing family member.
Yeah, specifically the absent father, which Spielberg ties into a lot of those films, but all the rest of it. And we already know something's wrong with Reagan. We already know something's up with the daughter. We don't know what it is, and this is something I really like about The Exorcist, is that it keeps this balance between science and religion really quite quite even until the very, very end. And then it's...
Some people may call it puberty, but
Actually, yeah, you could make a strong case for it being quite a heavy metaphor for puberty. But anyway, back to the attic. And this is where you find one of my favourite horror tropes, which is called the Luton bus. Now, the Luton bus essentially is a scare that isn't a scare. Now, in The Exorcist, she's exploring the attic, and then she hears a noise. It dies down, she screams, and the butler opens the door and goes, "What's wrong?" So it happens, and it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I know that as the bus.
Yeah, it's the Luton bus.
Why Luton?
Specifically, it comes from an old film from the 20s called Cat People, where
yes.
it was a Luton bus.
Okay.
what I think it's really doesn't date for The Exorcist is someone close to you, someone in your family being the devil, being the scary thing. That is, I think, that someone you know, your friend or family could turn into, I don't know, a werewolf or something, or, a possessed child. That is something that I think is really scary.
The music in The Exorcist.
Oh, yeah.
Tubular Bells.
Tubular Bells.
Yes.
I'm trying to remember where it was most prominent. Like,
It's her walking down the street. I think she's had a few tests and a few science things.
Uh-huh.
It's autumn. This is why it's my autumn movie. The leaves are
Yes.
brown. They're sort of whistling around her feet. The Tubular Bells comes in.
Mm-hmm.
I can't disassociate that music at all
Of
in
course,
any
of
any
course.
way. Cut that in. It's not. It's not
just
even
the
on that
music
long.
makes-
I associated with the film, but I don't remember exactly where it was used. It's a memory that always sticks with me. It's Tubular Bells, it's Mike Oldfield, and it's used in The Exorcist. But I've got a feeling it's only used for a short period of time.
It's seconds, I think.
Right.
It's like it's like a single shot of her walking down the street, but it's sort of like the approaching. You know something's wrong. You don't know what yet, but you know it's going to be bad.
The fear is following you.
Yeah, and it's like that weight on her shoulders then as well. It's like, and it's this is her daughter as well. And throughout the film, she's not really sort of explored as like an absent mother, but she's a hardworking. In a way, I guess in the 70s, she's quite a modern woman in a lot of ways. A single mother, a working actress with a job of her own, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Obviously doing very well for herself. She's got a entourage of people in the house, and she can pay for all this medical research.
Yeah.
So you were talking about families in horror. It's a big part of horror films. I think it's time to talk about A Quiet Place. So John Krasinski's A Quiet Place has just come out in Japanese cinemas. Before we begin, I should warn our Japanese listeners that there will be some mild spoilers. I'm looking at Chris. Mild?
Kind of big.
Some major spoilers, perhaps.
I think it's a pretty self-explanatory title.
Maria, do you want to give our listeners a quick rundown of the film's plot?
Yes, as the title explains, The Quiet Place. The movie is set in a post-apocalyptic world where a family is trying to survive the attack of monsters, then hunt by sound. So in order to survive, in order to not be killed, these people have to be quiet.
I feel like we should roll a clip. So, starting with you, Chris, what did you think of the film?
I thought it was a very interesting concept. It kind of harkened to a new style of storytelling that I've been seeing lately. It kind of reminded me a bit of this movie called Don't Breathe. It came out, I think it was maybe 1 or 2 years ago, where the characters are deprived of one of the audio-visual senses. I like that. I thought it could do a little bit more with it. And honestly, the visual storytelling was great. The world building, a little lackluster. But all in all, I thought it was an entertaining movie. I wouldn't say anything bad about it. But yeah, there was a few things, I should say, that just kind of irked me a little bit. And I kind of want to wait to talk about those until I hear everybody else's opinion, because it's probably going to be the same.
Okay, I think that the movie is a little bit too conceptual in the terms that it has to live up to its own rules, which is, the quietness and some of the... first of all, the point of view is solely from the survivors. So we don't have, like, for example, like in Planet Earth, someone else monitoring them and doing a little bit of exposition. So we don't have that. So that means that it's a little bit difficult to get the informations, and that could be troublesome for some viewers. And I think there are some interesting things that I would like to talk about after I hear all of your opinion.
Okay, I'll weigh in on that then. I liked it. I didn't think it was great. It was like, for me, if we're going to rate films in like the traditional sort of 5-star thing, I put it at a 3. It's a 3-star film. Strong ideas, relatively great execution, lacking in a lot of key areas.
All right, so maybe I'll pick up on that. I think the idea is fantastic.
It is.
And the
It's a great
performances
idea.
are fantastic. Particularly, I want to talk about the performances. So it's Emily Blunt, and it's funny. Emily Blunt always seems to be stuck in a very large rural house. I'm thinking of Looper here, right?
Oh,
Yes.
right, I'd forgotten about that.
You know, trying to figure out what's going on with her family. I really liked her performance. I thought that was exceptional. The kids are fantastic. The film is really, it's like a bottle episode. Remember those episodes of Star Trek or whatever where everyone's in one studio set, no one can leave for whatever reason, and everything takes place in a very small space. So Paramount's put up the money for this small 90-minute kind of sci-fi horror film, and it, for what it is, it works really well because it's a high concept. It works as the thing is meant to work. I enjoyed it. Yes. Does it develop beyond its concept? Maybe not as much as you'd like, but no, still, I thought it was good.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of really strong, good things in there to like. Particularly, I didn't realize until after I'd watched it that the actress, Millicent Simmons, is actually, I believe she's hard of hearing.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and I
yes.
had not realized that until I watched it.
And
Well, after I watched it.
and I have to say, she had a spectacular debut in a film called Wonderstruck by Todd Haynes, and she's her expression, her power in the communication, like nonverbal communication, is very strong. So she's someone that I'm looking forward to seeing in other films.
The camera really likes to
Yes.
study
Oh,
her
yeah,
face,
yeah.
and she
Oh,
can
yeah.
really hold the gaze of the camera. That's something that I got
Yes.
from that.
And also her brother, the actor, I think Noah Jupe, he was in Suburbican, and he's an amazing
seen
child
that yet.
actor. He is really someone to really
I mean,
monitor and
If
look.
you think about it, the kids don't have a huge amount to do. I mean, in terms of screen time, maybe the older sister has more time. The younger boy, I mean, he starts out, he's sick. He does a lot of emoting while watching the parents sign to him. So all of the we should point out that the communication in this film, as everyone's trying to remain as quiet as possible, this family, they use sign language. There are large stretches in this film where there is just signing and there may be a little bit of background noise, but very little. The actors all are responsible for acting with their eyes. They all have to talk to the camera with their eyes. There's not much else they can do.
And one other thing that I noticed was that probably because dialogues and sounds are so controlled, I could really feel the power of touch. Like there's one scene when they are starting their dinner and they all hold hands and start praying, and that scene, you can almost feel their love, what they were trying to say by the squeeze of the hand. That was something that really moved me.
So that's so interesting because I really felt that there was a kind of conservative element to this film in terms of the way that the family were taking responsibility for the life of a child, that you must sacrifice yourself for the child.
Yeah, in that sense, it's very conceptual. Yes.
Also, guns win.
Hey, die.
Yes.
Guns always win.
Guns always win.
I've seen Edgar Wright movies. Guns always win.
Marcus, Marcus, I agree with that because I don't pray before meals and stuff. So when the scene started, I felt this is really conservative. This is really kind of religious. But the way the scene is develops, like visually, you can feel the different hands, the different squeeze, everything they're trying to say that they cannot say with words.
No,
I'm
I'm certainly with you on that. I'm talking more broadly about the themes of the film
Yes,
in
definitely,
terms of
definitely.
the idea of sacrifice, the way that we must.
And there are a couple
look
of
to the
key
children.
sacrifices in that film as well.
Yes, and I mean, characters must make sacrifices in order to grow. That's one of the things that you do when you write a script.
Yeah.
You have to have some sort of
But
development.
here is pointed out. It's really
Here it's Close to on the
Maybe
nose.
a little bit too
Yeah.
pointed out. I'd
Yes.
say.
I don't know, but I'd like to counter the conservative argument with the fact that I feel like the gender roles between the brother and the sister are entirely reversed in this film, and I could have done with a bit more of their relationship because she is strong, she is outgoing, she wants to go hunting with her father, and he really doesn't. he's not keen.
That's a great point. I could have done with a lot more development of all of the characters.
Oh, yeah,
I think
to
that
be
goes back to what
honest,
you were saying
yes,
at the beginning.
I was actually going to kind of say the same thing, simply because while the daughter character was very developed in the sense that she was strong, she was possessed, you actually understood her motivation very well.
Well, they key that up very early on with
Exactly.
the death of a certain character.
Exactly. The movie knew what it was going to do with that girl. It did not know what it was going to do with that boy. That's actually one of the problems that I have with the movie. It seems like the movie presents a lot of problems that it did not need to actually introduce.
I totally agree because for her, I mean, the actress is 15 years old, and in the film, I think she's a teenager.
Yeah.
So I see it as from the viewpoint of the parents, and I understand that they want to keep her alive. So it's really, really important that she keeps quiet, but she's a teenager. So you can totally understand as a rebellious teenager, and you could totally buy into that without having all the the backstories, and that I totally agree with you, Chris.
Do you know, actually thinking about it in retrospect now, I'd argue the case that you could probably push those two characters together and have the female daughter, and if you have that, then you've got more screen time with the father. She's the one going hunting with him. You can develop that relationship, why he feels so distant, because she's terrified of the guilt of causing the murder of the baby brother.
It would have made a tighter story.
You don't need the baby brother, the younger son, at all, really.
Yeah.
One thing that really struck me, though, was that the stakes were very clear. I like the fact that the stakes... What normally happens in these kinds of films is that, the stakes are not clear enough, or you don't care enough about the characters. I cared about the characters. I wanted more of the characters. And I felt like, something bad could happen. I was, turned on by that suspense.
When they're playing Monopoly, I was like, that's a great idea. Why would you play Monopoly? That always causes fights. Are you crazy?
One of the things that drove me crazy about this movie is the visual storytelling medium. Here's the thing. When you're working with audio-visual storytelling, right, you have two dimensions. You have sight and you have sound. If you remove one, the story must be told through the other. And you have to do it effectively and consistently. And this movie did not consistently lay down its own rules. There were these amazing parts where they realized that they had to be quiet, right? The movie let you know that by showing you at the very beginning. There was no sound at the beginning of the movie. And then, all of a sudden, there was sound where there shouldn't have been sound because she couldn't hear, but she could hear, but then she couldn't hear. And it was very inconsistent, and it makes you have to, question what the hell is going on. And that's never good in a storyteller, or in a story, rather.
So in filmic terms, we're talking about diegetic and non-diegetic.
Yes.
Filmic language. But Chris, let me ask you, did you not see the whiteboard that said, be quiet, guns don't work, also bad things happen?
Wasn't it they have armor or something?
Yeah. The armor plating, question mark?
Oh, the redundancy of the story is so frustrating.
This is what pulls it down for me, because there's a number of things when you think about it, because I wrote down the days that they were active in this world. Now, the first time we meet the characters, there is 89 days into this apocalypse. Right. We're not talking the road here, we're talking 89 days. They still have electricity in this house. Are we going to believe that the army isn't really doing anything? They're at the point now where they're sort of in the countryside. Or maybe this family just got the wherewithal to sort of leg it into the forest early enough.
So the setting's something like, upstate New York. It's like East Coast for sure. It's got the New York Post floating down the street.
Yeah. But they figured they've been at it long enough to realise that placing sand on the route to the town is a prudent method of getting to and from the town. There's a number of things here that don't match up, and this is what it pulls it down for me.
It really does. It's incongruous. I mean, at certain points they understand how the monsters work And at other points, they forget.
And there's only 3 of them in the area.
That's what they say.
Why
right?
are there only 3? Are they really that indestructible? But I do like the way it doesn't tell us where they're from.
But one thing I want to ask you guys, since you were mentioning Alien, in this one you can really see in details these monsters. How was that for you?
Absolutely. I was thinking the same thing, that you can see the creature very clearly. I think ILM made the creature design, and you see it very clearly right from the beginning.
Yeah, and like I said earlier on in this podcast, it's like the more you see, the less it is. In a weird way, I don't care if ILM designed it. I don't care if HR Giga designed it. It's like the more you see, and in Alien, you don't see anything at all. And
I mean,
there are glimpses.
it's the Bruce rule from Jaws, right? The
Yeah.
less you see, I mean, in that case, they
saved the
couldn't show
film.
the shark because it
Yeah.
looked terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It kept breaking down. But I totally agree. The
Yeah.
less you see, the more effective it is.
I could have done with just close-up shots of that thing's skull, because the skull was really unnerving, the way it opened up to show sort of where the sound receptors were, and when it was in distress, that was great.
That's really
That
interesting.
was important. That was
Yeah,
necessary.
it's necessary
That was
for the story.
necessary.
But
But
other
to
than
me,
that-
that's a little bit like those kind of incredible close-ups in Alien, where you just see teeth. You don't see the rest of the creature, because the rest of the creature is a guy in a rubber suit.
Some of the best shots in Alien are where it pans across, and if you don't know the alien's there, it's there. It's like its head is part of the scenery, or it's when a bird gets killed, the guy looking for the cat gets killed, and there's an entire shot, and it lasts for 5 seconds.
Harry Dean Stanton.
Harry Dean Stanton, thank you very much, and you see the alien, and it's hanging there, but it looks like machinery.
No, I think it's one of those cases where evolved CG doesn't make you justice. I think that I want to be scared by something that I was not able to see, and then I can imagine the worst.
Okay, a couple of quick questions. Chris, will you be recommending it to others?
I would recommend this film to people who are not familiar with the genre of horror and visual storytelling. Otherwise, there are better.
Maria?
I would be recommending for a date for a couple where one is a horror fan and the other likes dramatic films. That I think, and what's really interesting is that you engage into the silence keeping. So you find yourself holding your breath and trying not to. So, try eating popcorn in that kind of environment. That's, it's a challenge.
Die.
Actually, I would echo Maria's sentiments, and I'll go one further. Actually, I don't really think of it as a horror film in a lot of ways.
No, it doesn't
No,
really.
no.
I agree.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that's not to disparage against it really, but like in the quality there, because like don't forget John Krasinski is like a first-time director here, and he's a fantastic
Well, he's
actor.
not a first-time
Oh,
director.
is he not?
No, it's technically, if you include some episode of The Office, this is his fourth film.
Yes. Okay, that's a good point. But like, I think there's a lot of skill in this play. What I would say is like maybe watch John Krasinski's next film.
What I really appreciate is that as other actors being directors, he's really, really good at directing actors. So you see a lot of things that I'm sure they are improvised, and there are some kind of little things like little gestures or little plus things. I enjoyed the details in this movie.
Yeah, and we haven't even mentioned the fact that John Krasinski and Emily Blunt are married and presenting a married couple on film, and that's kind of interesting. I mean, I did buy it. I got their relationship.
So if it's not a horror film, what kind of film is it?
I personally would not consider this as much a horror movie as I would consider it a thriller. I really do divide horror movies into different genres. For me, a real horror movie has to abide by certain rules that this movie just doesn't. I mean, it's very sci-fi, to be honest. I mean, it's reminiscent of Alien. I would say that this doesn't have the horror punch. This isn't something that you go home thinking about. This isn't something that you are worried about as a person. This is something that you've seen, and you've seen the outcome to, and you've seen the conclusion to. Therefore, I would not classify it as horror.
I think the one thing that is lacking from this film that other classic horrors has is really messing up with trauma, with primal fears, with moral issues. We see this family is one-sided, really good. They're really just worried about the survival. So you don't have anything that you think, how would I act in it? How would I respond?
Well, you have one character with a guilty conscience.
Yes, that's true. But I didn't think that was enough.
So-
Maria.
So the question becomes, did you buy into that? guilty conscience. I'm not sure I fully bought into that. I
No,
always
I-
felt like that was a conceit on the part of the screenwriters, and it didn't really work for me.
No, I have to be honest, I didn't buy into it. I said that before, but the daughter's behavior, I would totally just justify it as teenage rebelliousness. I didn't need the super idea, the concept.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, there's one more thing that I have to bring up because you brought up diegetic versus non-diegetic language in film. And that's a huge thing that I'm into because I watch a lot of really bad found footage horror movies. And the non-diegetic language in this film, unfortunately, there's a point where it starts to blur.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there's a point where like the girl gets back her hearing and she starts packing stuff and then there's music and it's like, which part of this am I supposed to believe she hears? Where is the line?
They should have had the courage of their convictions with the sound and just
Yes.
gone with it. Didn't need a
Yes.
soundtrack,
Yes.
just do it.
100% agree with that.
Yeah, for me, the sound was one of the big inconsistencies of the film. So if there's something scary they can put in a sound, a Foley sound, that is there to help boost the jump scare.
Yeah.
But at other times, it seems to be part of the scene, and it doesn't really seem to be consistent.
There's
in my
that
view.
fantastic scene where she's in the cornfield and she puts the thing back on and she can hear and then she can't hear and it's like in the background. You know it's there. We know it's there. We've caught a glimpse of its ankle, but she doesn't
And then the
play
music,
with that. Yeah,
the
you
music
don't need
comes
it.
in.
I think they were trying to keep it as mainstream, the mainstream film, because it's like we don't want. I read it somewhere that they don't want it to sound like an experiment, and
it
they want it
should've
to
been,
make.
though.
But I think they should have trusted more the audience into this journey.
Yeah,
I think.
definitely.
I think it's time we wrap this up. So you can follow us on Instagram, Last Picture House, and we're at Last Peak House on Twitter. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode. Thanks for listening.
Look, the whole gauntlet of being a teenager is, can you survive being slashed to death by a dude who got murdered in a lake 20 years ago by some negligent counselors? And if you can survive that, then hey, good, you get to go to college. If not, well, fuck it, you're dead now.
I was a camp counselor and I'd like to say that no one died on my watch.